Welcome to Eagleswings Garden, where we've had thousands of visitors view this garden and more than 100 weddings every year for the last 8 years. The garden started 18 years ago as just little tiny plants, and before that, when we cleared, it was just a bush. So now I want to take you on a tour of this garden in Eldoret, Kenya, East Africa. As we started to develop this garden, one of the things that my wife insisted on is that before we spent any money on the garden, we had to complete the house. So being a gardener, that frustrated me for the 13 months it took to build the house. But after that, we focused in on the garden, and I count the beginning of this garden as December 2001. And so it's coming up on December, and it's almost 18 years old. So all the trees, all the plants you see, nothing was here. It was just a bush. And then little by little, as we began to fill in the design we had made, and even going to Nairobi and bringing plants back in our car, filling the car with plants. And so many of the plants you see here were not even available here in Eldoret. We had to go to Nairobi to get them. After being in Kenya for 5 years, we moved from Nairobi out to Eldoret to help our church start a Bible school. After 1 year in Eldoret, my wife agreed with me that we should look for land, build our own house, and make a beautiful garden. The one determining factor for the land was that it be along a river so we could do irrigation of the garden because of the long dry seasons in East Africa. The Lord helped us to find a perfect piece of property in a nice neighborhood 1 mile from the Bible school. It took 8 months of shopping to find the property and purchase it. When we were first looking at several properties along the river and making offers on the properties, we walked on the land that eventually became ours. It was so bushy and run down that my wife Jennifer actually said these words, "I'll never live here." It was so bushy and ugly that nobody could see the beauty that was underneath. There were no trees except a few acacia along the river, and this is exactly what attracted me to the property, the beautiful Acacia Abysinca trees along the river. The bush was so big that it reached up to the top of the branches of the acacia trees and almost completely blocked the view of the river. It took 10 men 2 days to chop down all the bush and many days more to clear it away and begin removing the rubble and vast quantities of stones which were later used in the building and design. This revealed the rich loam soil throughout the landscape. Unique features of Eagleswings garden design. In order to make Eagleswings garden, there are several features which make up the uniqueness of the garden, and which nobody else really sees in gardens around in East Africa. So one of the key elements of making a successful garden is to realize that most compounds are dealing with squares or rectangles. So the boundary of the compound is going to be a square or rectangle, and the house will oftentimes be a square or rectangle. So it looks not very natural. And so one of the things that a garden can do is break up those straight lines. And that's what I always try to do when I design a garden, and when I've designed this one, is to break up straight lines. So when you look around at the compound, even though we're dealing with straight lines in the house and the compound boundary, you can't really tell because we've made undulating beds. So everywhere that the flowers are and the plants are held in, they're held in by not a straight line, but an undulation or a bending of the bed. And that makes it very beautiful and natural looking, and it breaks up straight lines. That's a key element of making a successful garden look natural, breaking up straight lines. Another thing that's very important is the retaining walls. Now, it costs a little bit of money, but the money that it saves you in time and how it keeps the garden very beautiful and the beds intact is having that retaining wall, spending a little bit of money on it. And so these retaining walls are made of the natural stone, and as high as they are off the grass, they're also the same depth below. So that adds a lot of strength to it. In fact, these are 18 years old and they've never really had much problem breaking up or anything. They've held strong. And what it does is it holds the nutrients in and keeps the weeds and the grass out. And when we water, also the water stays in. And plus it sets a boundary, so when kids are playing, or we have more than 100 weddings a year, they don't walk in the garden, they just stay out on the grass. And it sets a natural boundary that looks flowing and beautiful. None of the plants, there's no plants, no bushes, no trees that are out in the grass. Everything is inside a bed, a flower bed. And what that does is it keeps the nutrients up against the roots, holds the moisture, and inside up against the roots as well. And then it protects them, and it helps them to grow faster. So it's worth every penny if you spend money on making retaining walls. Another key element of making a successful garden has to do with pruning. Plants, when you get them, are usually very tiny in a bag, and so it doesn't look like much when you begin. And you have to know the size that they're going to end up. You also need to know the shade or sun requirements of that plant, and then you have to know how to prune. And so a plant like this one here, this is an oleander with a double pink flower. It started out as a little tiny plant in a bag. And now you see how beautiful it looks, it fills up with blooms several times a year. And it didn't get that way naturally. We actually had to prune it as it started out from the bottom all the way up. We've been pruning to make it get that shape. And this kind of a shape with a plant like this is what you call a shrub, which is like a large bush, but a small tree, so it's a shrub. A plant like this is actually perfect in the way it blooms when it's shaped just like that. But it took many times of pruning it as it was growing to make it look just like that. Here's another example down below. This was covered in yellow bushes, the yellow barberry, and they got too big. They were just way too high, starting to take over everything. And so what we ended up having to do is trim them down, bring them down hard, and then little by little they're growing up and they're going to fill back in and it'll look very beautiful again. So there's times when you do pruning where that particular plant doesn't look very good, but after it grows back, then it starts looking good again. And so what we try to do is time our pruning so that the whole area isn't looking bad, but only section by section or plant by plant. And that way it still looks good, even though parts of the garden are being pruned at different times. An example of pruning would be this shrub right here. This is yesterday, today, and forever shrub. And you can see how it's been trimmed down at the bottom, tight. And then it kind of has a chance to grow out like that. And then that's what it really loves, is to have a chance to kind of stretch its legs and grow a little bit. And then it blooms better that way. In fact, as I'm standing here right now and the sun is starting to slowly go down, this is starting to release a lot of fragrance. It's quite awesome. And that's what you want with plants. You want them to look their best, and pruning is one of the key elements in making that happen. Another key element that makes a successful garden is to make sure the plants have plenty of water, but not too much water. They also need a time to dry out. And so when we were planning doing irrigation in this garden, because East Africa has different dry seasons, we wanted to locate down on the river so we would have a source of water. And the Lord did provide that source of water for us on the Sosiani River. But when we were making the idea for designing the irrigation, we initially had spray nozzles that were very small on stems. And what happened is we decided not to do that. And I'm glad we didn't, because you see how tall the plants have grown. They would have been covering those spray nozzles. And so what we ended up with was a very simple system using a 2-inch pipe buried under the ground coming up from the river. And we have 6 different taps spread around the garden. And we have a hose that is the same size as a fire hose that hooks to those taps. And so each tap that we have is on the edge of the beds, and it's very huge, 2 inches. And when we hook the hose to it and open it, it comes with a lot of force out. There's so much force that we can't actually water the garden directly with the hose, or it would do erosion. So what we have to do is hold the hose up in the air, and it sprays up in the air and comes down like hard rain. And that makes it easy for the gardener, because all he has to do is hook it on the edge of the beds, then drag the heavy hose out on the grass, and he does watering in that one section. Then we move it to another section, and that 75-foot hose covers that whole area. And it's very simple. It's simple to repair, and it waters very quickly. In fact, our pump pumps 20,000 liters per hour. And so what happens is in 3 hours, he puts 60,000 liters down on the garden, and all of it just soaks down into the soil. What a lot of people make mistake when they try to water is they use a little tiny 1/2-inch hose, and they just end up watering the top layer of the soil, and they don't get down to the root zone. And what they do is they create an evaporation engine. It actually evaporates the soil below there even faster, and it dries out the garden even worse. So doing what I call flood irrigation is actually much more successful. It goes down to the root zone, it stays inside the beds longer, and the roots chase after the water instead of being dried out from a tiny layer of water. They have a deep flooding. And you only have to do that like one time, maybe every week and a half or every week during the dry season. The way that our beds are set up, they hold the water in, and it makes it very efficient. So actually, our garden grows during the dry season as well as during the wet season. One of the problems we faced in having a garden where we have thousands of visitors every year is that it ended up making pathways. And one such pathway is here, and we tried to fill it in with grass plugs and seeds and mark it off with bamboo and keep people from walking on it, and they would just make another path next to it. Then when we took the bamboo away and they started walking on it, it made the path again. And it looked really bad. As beautiful as the garden looked, this one thing was like an eyesore. And so one day my wife and I got the idea of using Mazera stone, natural stone, and we made a design with it, and now it's solved the problem. If we've never had the problem anymore, we filled in the gaps with grass, and it stayed like this now for like more than 2 years. And it's a very simple solution, very beautiful, very natural, and it eliminated one of our headaches. Welcome to one of the most beautiful rooms in the whole house, the veranda. This is where we spend a lot of our time relaxing, and this is also a place where it costs a little extra money to build, but man, it's so beautiful to be able to look out in the garden and relax here, read a book. We eat our meals here quite often. Sometimes I'll be here grading my papers, and so this is my favorite room in the whole house, looking out in the garden. Also here we have special plants that are not anywhere else in the garden. Maybe they really can't handle the garden itself. They're not quite hardy enough. And so we keep them here. We rotate them from the greenhouse to here. And so you have something that loves shade like this philodendron, and different kinds of ferns, like this is a rabbit's foot fern, and this is a variegated succulent. And so these kind of plants really won't do well out in the garden. So we put them here in pots on the veranda. And the veranda is where we really can spend many hours enjoying the garden. Here we have a plant called Ravinalis. It originates in Madagascar, and the common name or nickname is traveler's palm. It's a very beautiful plant. It's not really a palm, but they call it a palm because it kind of grows like one. And it's called traveler's palm because you can tap the base and get water if you're a traveler. And also the direction of the way the fronds line up is usually north-south or east-west. So supposedly a traveler would be able to tell their direction by it and also get water. One of the favorite places in this whole garden for children to come is this sloping hillside. And one of the things that we did was there has a terrace that had been built by the colonials, and we bulldozed one section so we could go from the back of the property all the way down to the river. And children, when they come to this garden, they go straight for this hillside and start rolling down. They absolutely love it. Another feature of this garden that the weddings really love is this yucca plant. Because it's sitting next to our well, it has a lot of water. This plant blooms a beautiful, fragrant, off-white flower. And this one has really thick base and it's spread out. And the weddings love to come here and shoot their photos. Here at the bottom of the garden near the river, we've tried to make plants that have either purple or blue in them. So this is what I call my blue garden. And blue plants are very unique. You don't see blue a lot in the garden. And one such plant is this one over here. It's what I call a blue hydrangea shrub. It's blooming a blue flower, and it forms in the shape of a shrub. And the leaves kind of look like a hydrangea bush. I don't know if it's in the same family or not, but it's one of my favorite plants in the whole garden because it blooms blue. We're here on the river patio, and behind me is the remains of an ancient house, probably built around 1909. And the first Afrikaners came out to Eldoret and began settling it in 1908, the year before. So what you see is basically just a ruin left over, except one part of it. And so for years we just had a rough concrete floor, and later when we wanted to develop it some more, we put finished tile on it. But when we were first developing this property, the bush was so big, it was actually growing up to the top of the acacia trees. You couldn't even see the river. And so when we cleared it, and later on we came and started cleaning all the stones out of it, one of the workers hit something hard, and we uncovered that there was a concrete slab here. And so we realized this was the floor of the old house that the Afrikaners built. And so now we call it the river patio, and sometimes I call it the Nyamachoma celebration zone because we like to grill meat down here. And this location is actually about 12 feet above the river. And many people have said when we were looking for property here along the river, why do you want to be along the river? There are thieves. And I said, I don't know where the thieves are. I just want to be along the river. And when you're here relaxing by the river, it's so calm. It actually relaxes you to hear the water sound. And so as you can see down the way there, there's a waterfall that was man-made. And then the river sometimes will rise a few feet above that. And then sometimes it goes down lower in the dry season where you can see the rocks at the bottom. And then it flows right past our property on a corner, and then it goes past some natural falls in the distance there. We're here at the River House, and this is the ruin left over from the old Afrikaner development here along the river. And when we first came here, there were trees growing up out of it, and it was just a ruin. But our original intent in our design was to make a roundavel down by a river, whichever property we would end up getting. And so when we ended up getting this property, it had this old ruin, and it just was perfect for us to make our roundavel or our property down on the river. And so what we did, we left the outside original, how we found it, but we finished the inside. And so we have team meetings down here, prayer time, team building, and also when we have our time of what I call a Nyama Choma celebration center, Nyama Choma crusade, where we celebrate with the team and their families. We'll use this room to put the food. And so it's a beautiful little addition to the entire property. And in the beginning, this house, of course, didn't have anything. It was just trees and bush growing up out of it. But when we refinished the inside, then we put a thatched roof on top and had thatching there for many years. But later we came and made a more permanent roof. One of the most unique plants that is in the tropics is the palm tree. And I highly recommend using palm trees. If you use no other tree, make sure you use that. That tree alone, the palm tree, evokes a sense of tropics. And one of the great things about a palm tree is that it takes what I call small footprint. So you can have a lot of trees around it, and it grows straight up and branches out and becomes very beautiful. And so it has a small footprint in the garden, meaning you can do a lot with it, and it doesn't really produce too much shade, and it also doesn't take up from other plants growing around it. If you can believe it, this palm tree, which I bought in Nairobi, was 1,500 shillings, and it was only about 3 or 4 feet tall, very tiny tree. And now 18 years later, you can see what it looks like. It's absolutely glorious. Another design element that we incorporated into the garden was to use miniature bamboo. And miniature bamboo is behind me. It makes a very beautiful hedge. You can shape it in different shapes. And also, the way you see it growing here is totally full size. It'll never get any bigger than that. That's why they call it miniature bamboo. And so on this side of the garden is the beautiful side, the side with all the plants and flowers and trees. And on the other side is where the vegetable garden and the greenhouse and the studio are. So it separates the work area from the play area. We're here on the river landing, and this place is something that was just a big, huge rock, and there were trees growing on it. And what we did, we cleared it away and then put rubble from the vegetable garden and then put a small slab on top. And this is absolutely my favorite place in the whole compound. This is why I wanted to be along the river, so that we could come and sit and relax by the river. And I'm telling you, if you sit on this river, the Sosiani River, for 30 minutes, you'll feel totally relaxed, and it provides a good end to the day. Oftentimes we'll even bring furniture down here and have a meal down here. I've seen river otters here on the river. I've seen African black ducks, which are resident here. They're migrating birds, including resident birds. We have the Hadada ibis, we have the sacred ibis, we have a resident Goliath kingfisher, which is one of the largest of the kingfishers, and he flies around in this area. And I've been sitting here in the evening time when river otters will swim by. And I've even had river otters come right up to me as I'm sitting here, and they don't realize I'm here, and all of a sudden they come up and they realize something's changed about the river landing, and then they swim back in. There was even one time I was here and 4 river otters went swimming right by. And so it's quite amazing to see some natural wildlife and to have a relaxing place to enjoy. This is Africa. One of the things that is really awesome about this property, of course, is the natural acacia trees that are along the river. These are the only things that were here when we arrived. Everything else was just a bush. I can remember when we were looking for property along the river, we had put in an offer on a property just a little bit down the river. And I can remember looking down the river and seeing these beautiful acacia trees hanging over the river. And I said, I want this property so I can look down the river and see them. Little did I know that one day we would end up owning this property and actually have the acacia trees right on our property. This is Africa, and the acacia trees tell the story. Here we are in the vegetable garden, and originally this area was graded off by the bulldozer and there were many stones. So it took us a long time to clear out all the stones. But now you can see it's growing different kind of vegetables, including lettuce, sakuma, and over there are some grafted avocado trees, and we have mulberry trees, and I'm even growing cut flower calla lilies, 1 row of them and 1 row of the bird of paradise for cut flowers. My wife loves the calla lily, that's her favorite, and I love the bird of paradise. And so we kind of grow them almost like a crop. So this vegetable garden, it's on a slope, but what we did was we put rocks to hold back the soil from washing down. And then after that, when we decided to spend a little money, we mortared those rocks and made it a permanent wall. We tried in the beginning to use the same system as in the flower garden with the heavy duty hose and heavy water coming down on the garden. But here we found, because you want to plant the vegetables from seed, the seeds get bombarded by that heavy water and they oftentimes don't do well. So we switched to the spray nozzle irrigation, and that's a much more gentle water, and the vegetable seeds love that. And so this is the vegetable garden, and we get some natural mboga, natural vegetables, including lettuce that we love. And also over here is we have a macadamia nut tree, and we're also growing plants that have come from the greenhouse. We put them out into some of the rows of the vegetable garden in order to harden them up. So another secret of this garden is that we recycle all the cuttings back into the garden by doing composting. And one of the things that we did in the beginning was my gardener was just cutting the cuttings by hand, and it took a lot of hours to do that. So then we finally got this chopper, and this is just a Patio mill chopper, and we use it to run the branches through and make compost. So I learned the method that is the best way, and it's simple. You just take your dry cuttings, your green cuttings, manure, ash from the fireplace or the jiko, and then soil on top. And the soil has organic bacteria in it, and so does the manure. And the manure is like the engine of the compost. It makes it heat up. And so when you layer those levels and add a little water and cover it, it heats up almost so hot that you could almost boil an egg. And then as the compost, the heat starts going away, then you flip it and add air back into the compost. And you have to do that like 3 times, and then it breaks down into what I call black gold. As you prepare the compost, it goes from cuttings like this to being chopped up and made into a pile like this. And oftentimes the material that is there is a huge amount, and by the time it's finished, it's shrunk all the way down to something like this. And it's in the process, over about a 7-week period, we flip it, I think, at least 3 times to get air back into it. Each time you flip it, the heat builds back up in it, and it cooks. And a lot of times people think compost, maybe it's rotting, but it's not. If it's rotting, it's not composting properly. Composting has an earthy smell, not a rotting smell, and it's actually a very healthy thing. And there's no better soil than compost. This is what I call black gold. And very valuable, and it's part of what has made this garden very successful. And I highly recommend that everybody that can do composting for their garden. And this has every kind of nutrient, trace element, and all the things you need to have a successful garden. Black gold. So when we built the house, we made 2 sewer lines, one with the brown water from the toilets and one with the gray water from the sinks, showers, and the gutters. And so we directed the gray water line to come here in the vegetable garden. And so every time we wash clothes, every time we take a shower, every time we wash dishes, every time it rains, all the water comes right here into the vegetable garden and keeps the water flowing into the garden and the garden well watered. I always try to encourage people who visit the garden to plant African hardwood trees in their garden. And so that's what I've done here along the edge of the vegetable garden. I planted what they call Elgantique. It's, I believe, in the olive family. And the wood is super hard, and the grain is very beautiful. And when you harvest this tree, it makes for a lot of money. And so I suggest that people even plant a ½ acre or an acre of their shamba just in this kind of a tree. And by the time they're old, they'll have money for retirement. Also in this garden, we have ivy growing along the wall to hide the ugliness of this wall. The florists in the town come and collect the ivy and give us a little bit of income. So the garden is producing income, even with cuttings from the leaves and flowers and even ivy. Once we've grown the plants in the greenhouse, then before customers come and buy them, they start getting too big. So what we do, we bring them outside and put them in one of the rows in the vegetable garden and harden up the plants. So now they're used to the outside light and they're ready to go in someone's garden. As we developed the garden, we had many people coming here for weddings and music videos, and that means we had thousands of visitors, and people were asking, can we have some of the plants that are in your garden? So we made a greenhouse and later made a better one, and we grow these plants, and my gardener also makes money from the sale. And so we get people coming and buying plants from us. It's not something we planned, but it just ended up because of the nature of this garden and having many visitors. And so what I do is I grow plants that you can't normally get in town in the nurseries along the road. Most of these plants came from Nairobi anyway, so you'd have to go all the way to Nairobi to get them. So I call this a specialty plant greenhouse. And we built the roof so it's very low and it keeps the heat down on the plants because they're tropical plants. Unlike a vegetable or tomato greenhouse, which you need a very high roof, this particular greenhouse needs a low roof to keep the heat on the plants.
Hi, my name is Shadrach Kipchumba. I'm the caretaker of Eaglewings Garden. I've been here for about 10 years. My experience in this garden, I think, is seen by the look of the garden. The first time when I came here, I didn't know anything more about landscaping and even the maintenance. But for now, I think I can say I'm a professional. The uniqueness of this garden is the way it slopes, the varieties of flowers, and the way they have been arranged. They have been arranged in a manner that when a new person comes here, he notices a lot of differences with other gardens. They cannot tell that here is Eldoret town. So that is a blessing to us. They say this is a wonderful garden they have ever seen here in Eldoret. Sometimes when I'm walking on the road near the tarmac there, they ask me, where is this eagle garden? I told them, just go down there, just look at it. They say, we have heard from many people saying, there's a garden called Eagle Wings garden that looks very nice. So I tell them it's just here. Many people have a dream that they should have a garden like this one. But it's not easy to maintain a garden like this. There are so many challenges, especially we Kenyans. Some people don't like spending much on plants. Some people cannot pay people good money to do the maintenance job. So that is, in my view, that is a challenge for many people in Kenya here. But otherwise, to have a garden like this is a blessing, especially in a town like Eldoret here. I would like to welcome everyone to come and view this Eagle Wings garden and enjoy it, if it's weddings, photos, music, Christian music recording. And also it's like a role model to other neighborhood, at least to have a good garden like this. And also in Eldoret, and also in Kenya as a whole. If you live in a place like this, even you cannot have a stress. Whenever you walk around, you just feel relaxed. Even the air is the oxygen that we breathe here is fresh. So you feel like the real Garden of Eden that was talked about in the Bible. Thank you. Welcome.
Surrounded by Eagleswings Garden, in the very middle of it is Eagleswings Studio. It's where we record audio, Christian audio, and Christian music videos, as well as my TV program, A Higher Place. And this was an old water tank that we reclaimed to have some apartments for our team members, and then later we built the audio studio, and then after that the video studio. And so it's really nice to be able to have a studio surrounded by a garden, and it really evokes a sense of peace, and it's really good for doing recording of Christian gospel music and video.